I apologize if I will seem unusually angry. However, in this case, I believe that anger is warranted. I'm currently observing the New Hampshire primary results with 77.4% of precincts reporting. Ron Paul currently has 13,945 votes, which puts him at 7.7%. Now, compare this to Ron Paul's Iowa results, where he polled at 10%. In Iowa, Ron Paul dramatically beat the mainstream media's landline poll estimates that he would get only around 1 to 2%. In New Hampshire, the landline polls estimated that Ron Paul would get about 8%. So right now, in New Hampshire, Ron Paul is getting a smaller percentage of the votes than the landline polls have estimated, even though Ron Paul's actual performance has consistently beaten the landline polls. Something is wrong here. What is wrong is a deliberate, calculated smear attack by the New Republic, and specifically by James Kirchick of the New Republic, who has just today released an article titled "Angry White Man," subtitled "The Bigoted Past of Ron Paul." This article consists of a bunch of unwarranted, unjustified, absolutely false smears against Ron Paul. Furthermore, this article is trying to resurrect an old issue which has already been extensively addressed by the Ron Paul campaign. And this article seems to resurrect this issue specifically for the purpose of damaging Ron Paul's performance in New Hampshire. Well, if this was the purpose, the New Republic and Mr. Kirchick have certainly succeeded. Ron Paul should have polled in the double digits in New Hampshire. Certainly his performance in Iowa indicates this, and New Hampshire has a much larger population of independents who are permitted to vote in the Republican primaries than does Iowa. So Ron Paul should have gotten about 15 to 20% of the New Hampshire vote. The fact that he didn't illustrates the damage that Kirchick's article has wrought. Now, Kirchick accuses Ron Paul of essentially being a closet bigot, a racist, and a homophobe, based on certain newsletters that were published under Ron Paul's name during the time that he was not in Congress. However, the Ron Paul campaign and Ron Paul himself have made no secret that these newsletters have existed, and Ron Paul has repeatedly admitted simply to negligence that he failed to monitor what the people issuing this newsletter were putting out under his name. He did not, however, write any of the kinds of racist and homophobic invective that Kirchick accuses him of writing. Now, I know this because my magazine, The Rational Argumentator, has published 64 of Ron Paul's articles. So, I think I'm pretty qualified to know what Ron Paul actually believes on this and on other issues. Well, here is an article by Ron Paul titled "Government and Racism," which was published on April 23rd of 2007, not in the 1970s through the 1990s, but quite recently. And here is what Ron Paul says about racism. Racism is simply an ugly form of collectivism, the mindset that views humans strictly as members of groups rather than individuals. Racists believe that all individuals who share superficial physical characteristics are alike. As collectivists, racists think only in terms of groups. By encouraging Americans to adopt a group mentality, the advocates of so-called diversity actually perpetuate racism. Their obsession with racial group identity is inherently racist. So, it's clear that Ron Paul isn't fond of enforced political correctness. He doesn't believe that the government can mandate people not to say certain things or not to engage in certain economic practices, but he also condemns racism as such, as collectivism, and he condemns it in all of its guises. Is this the kind of man who would make derogatory statements about blacks and about gays? I don't think so. Furthermore, Kirchick's article accuses Ron Paul of having made remarks that denigrate Martin Luther King Jr. Well, this is simply not true. It is not Ron Paul's position. Ron Paul's true position is that Dr. Martin Luther King is one of his heroes. He has said so quite recently, because Martin Luther King believes in judging people by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Ron Paul similarly believes in individualism rather than collectivism, and so the two philosophies seem to be compatible. Now, Kirchick's article is not only false, it is ludicrous, and it is devoid of any kind of journalistic professionalism. In the article, one of the organizations that Mr. Kirchick ascribes racism to is the Ludwig von Mises Institute. Now, I have written for the Ludwig von Mises Institute. I've had several articles and papers published on that site. And I will tell you that the Ludwig von Mises Institute is not a racist organization. It is a libertarian organization animated by the writings of the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises and one of his American students, Murray Rothbard, who was essentially the founder of libertarianism in the United States. Both of them abhor racism. Now, what warrant does Mr. Kirchick use to allege that the Mises Institute is a racist organization? He claims that because the Mises Institute has published books critical of Lincoln and the expansion of the federal government during the Civil War, this implies that the Mises Institute is somehow a group of closet supporters for the Confederacy during the Civil War, and ergo closet supporters of slavery. Now, how one makes the leap from being an opponent of Lincoln's policies, many of which have grown the size of government, imposed protectionist tariffs, imposed conscription, suspended habeas corpus, and clearly did not act in favor of freedom in all respects, how one can conflate that with support for slavery is inconceivable to me. And the kinds of mental gymnastics that Kirchick has had to do for the purpose of smearing Ron Paul are astonishing to me. Astonishing to me precisely because it is so difficult to smear Ron Paul, precisely because it is necessary to go to such ludicrous depths in order to say anything negative about the man's personal integrity. Now, one can disagree with his policy views, but one cannot question that Ron Paul is an honest, upright individual who does not conceal what he truly believes, who is willing to espouse an unpopular position to any group of individuals. The very fact that Ron Paul is speaking out against the Iraq War and is the sole Republican candidate to do so indicates his willingness to speak the truth. Now, in an interview with Tucker Carlson recently, Mr. Kirchick accused Ron Paul of speaking in, quote, secret racist code that only the racists and neo-Confederates hearing it would understand, while the rest of us would perceive it to be innocuous. Now, the moment somebody accuses a prominent political figure of speaking in secret racist code, it is the accuser's sanity that one begins to question, not that of the accused. And we must recognize that Kirchick's allegations are ridiculous and absurd, that he has violated the basic standards of journalistic integrity and of professionalism, that he has committed fraud, that he has committed slander, and that he does not deserve to be a disseminator of information to the extent that he has been. I'm not suggesting that anybody censor or repress him, but I do think it would be wise for the New Republic to fire this man who has so clearly committed a breach of journalistic integrity. If this magazine wishes to even remotely resemble a standard bearer for truth and objectivity, then commentaries such as Kirchick's are unacceptable, not only for their content, but also for their timing, deliberately engineered to bring about the defeat of a candidate. This is unacceptable, and I hope that you will join me in absolute frustration at this character assassination, and I hope that you will spread the word about this abuse of journalistic authority.